Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, an update of the search for what happened to TWA Flight 800, making Atlanta safe for the Olympics, closing Pennsylvania Avenue to protect the White House. Then we get 4 perspectives on how complete security mixes with a complete democracy. And finally, Mark Shields and Cato Byrne of the National Review look at the political week. Paul Gigot is on vacation. It all follows our summary of the news this Friday.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by the Archer Daniels Midland Company, ADM, supermarket to the world. And by New York Life, yet another example of New York Life's wise investment philosophy. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
A medical examiner said today analysis of the victims' bodies so far does not prove a bomb exploded on TWA Flight 800. Federal investigators also said they were not prepared to say a bomb was involved, but they did say the matter is being treated as a criminal investigation. Rain and fog made it harder today to recover victims and debris from the crash site. Coast Guard cutters, helicopters, and C-130s searched a 2,600 square mile area of the Atlantic Ocean off Long Island. A Coast Guard spokesman said 4 tons of debris from the wrecked plane have been found. We'll have more on the story right after this news summary. This was opening day for the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta. President Clinton and his family were welcomed by athletes from around the world as he toured the facilities. Atlanta has spent more than $300 million on security and has employed some 30,000 police officers, military personnel, and private security guards. President Clinton praised American athletes at the Olympic Village.
I want you to win all the medals you can. I want you to mop up and do great. But I want you to realize that just by being what you already are, you are a source of enormous pride to our country and an inspiration to the world. And I hope tonight and these next couple of weeks are the greatest time of your life.
We'll have more on security at the Olympic Games after the news summary. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to a Flight 800 update, security at the Olympics, White House security, democracy and security, and the week of politics. We begin with an update on the crash of TWA Flight 800. While investigators waited out the bad weather on Long Island, they briefed reporters on what they've learned so far. First up was Dr. Charles Whetley, the Suffolk County medical examiner.
Okay, to date we have recovered 100 bodies and a number of body parts. Our biggest problem at the moment is getting information from the families basically concerning identifying characteristics such as dental x-rays, regular x-rays, medical records, anything that's distinctive like scars, tattoos, and so forth. To address this, Suffolk County Police Department, the homicide section, as well as personnel from our office are meeting with the families and are obtaining as much information on that as possible. It's my understanding TWA has given kits to the families so they can expedite the delivery of dental records to us. As of this moment, we have tentative identifications on 16 of the individuals. We have 2 positive identifications. The 2 positive identifications come from fingerprints for one individual and secondly by visual identification of the other. Unfortunately, it's one of our volunteer dentists who knew one of the victims on the plane and was able to make the identification, but even that is going to be confirmed by dental x-rays. In a 3-to-1 ratio, the victims have been coming into us without clothing, and that also means, therefore, sometimes, many times, without identifiers such as wallets, driver's licenses, and that. The lack of clothing is because of the mechanics of the explosion and crash, which literally will tear clothing off of these victims.
Doctor, I read something where you use x-rays to check for missiles and projectiles that may be trapped by the bodies. Can you explain what you're looking for and if you found anything?
Okay. The basic concept is that in most bombs, homemade bombs anyway, the human body becomes a projectile trap. They are trapping metallic fragments and other foreign materials that are part of the explosion and part of the bomb itself. That is what we are looking for in the X-rays. Now, have we found anything? The answer to that is no. Do we expect to find anything? Again, the answer is no. With the security measures that are in place at most airports, people are not terrorists, or somebody is not going to be bringing on a classical pipe bomb. Most likely they would be using things like plastic explosives and so forth, which from the medical examiner point of view on X-rays would not leave much of any trace whatsoever. Bottom line is I'm not seeing anything to indicate bombing, but that does not exclude it.
Doctor, can you talk about the immediacy of death and whether any survived for any period of time?
It's really a hard question to answer. Generically, I think I can say is that death would have occurred almost instantaneously for the vast majority of people on there. The few things we've seen suggesting vegetative functions after impact are probably either in people who are either unconscious or in the dying process at the particular time. I think it's important to realize that this is basically a non-survivable crash and that is going to be virtually instantaneous.
So would the death have been in the sky or upon impact with the water?
It could have been both. The deceleration injuries we're seeing can be partly from collisions of victims inside the aircraft itself, hitting other portions of the aircraft and traveling in different directions at that moment, or it could also have been from free fall to the water itself. I think what's important to realize is that in a tragedy of this sort, most likely consciousness would have been lost momentarily, almost immediately after the explosion would have taken place, and the people would probably have been unconscious by the time they hit the water.
Is there any indication, Doctor, based on the people you are finding, is there any indication that there may be people in part of the plane that did not explode based on the injuries you were seeing?
I think it's very likely there are people who are still in the plane, yes. We still have over 100 bodies that have not been recovered. I think everybody's suspicion is that they're at 120 feet of water inside the plane itself that have not been exploded.
Is there any sign of heat, fire injuries?
So far, there have been no signs of fire injury, thermal injury on any of the victims. Dr. Stu Dawson, our Deputy Chief Medical Examiner, was at the scene supervising the body recovery effort, and he informs me that on the bodies that he's seen, which I think has probably been most of them, he's only seen some minor burn injuries, and this was probably from the fire of the burning fuel on the water more than anything else.
Are you seeing any trace chemicals that are not consistent with the explosion of the airplane, chemicals that would be unusual or may have been a part of any kind of bomb?
That is not something. Testing for chemicals that would be bomb components is really beyond our capability, I think. And that's not something that we would be able to find in a bombing victim unless it was a chemical bomb, like for chemical warfare or something like that. But a bomb meant to explode and destroy is not something that we would find chemically adherent to the body or inside the body that we could analyze more.
Doctor, you had the body count was roughly 104 from yesterday, correct?
Correct.
Then there's been no bodies recovered since yesterday or within the last 24 hours?
Right, approximately, right. I think since last night, right.
Is there any reason for that? Did they stop?
No, I think it's because most likely the bodies are underwater inside the remains of the plane.
Later in the day, federal officials spoke. Robert Francis of the National Transportation Safety Board and James Kallstrom of the FBI.
I've been with the families for most of the morning in at JFK, and they had a meeting at noon with the medical examiner. We talked a little bit about what you folks heard about last night. They asked some questions of the NTSB, but I would say at this point their interest was very much, understandably, more with what the medical examiner was doing and what was happening there. So we will continue to work with those folks and do whatever we can, but the medical examiner has certainly got a major role to play at this point. On the search for wreckage out there, the structures team went out this morning at 8 o'clock. As you can tell, anybody that's here, the wind is blowing pretty hard. And they went to a spot starting the search where there had been some bubbling of jet fuel last night, just before they came in. They did have time to use the side scanner sonar, and they did find a spike quite close to the spot where that oil had been coming up. One of the problems was that it was so rough out there that a lot of the people that were on the ship were getting sick. They did have divers with them, but as we explained before, the divers are for recovery, they're not for locating. So the divers did not go in the water because we're still not sure of the location. Given how rough it was, we were at risk of losing the sonar if it was towed, and that would be a long-term setback in terms of replacing it. So it was decided, given that the weather was not good, it was very rough, that they would come back in, which they did. Now they're planning to go back out again tomorrow morning and resume. This will obviously again be contingent on what the weather is like in the morning. Hopefully it'll be quieter, but this afternoon it's predicted to get rougher with stronger winds. The NOAA ship that was out there, which is used to being out in the ocean and doing work in this environment, got sufficiently rough so that they decided to go into port because their crew members were hitting their heads on the deck of the ship down below. So I guess it's suffice to say that it's pretty rough out there, and that's going to delay that part of the investigation.
We're not in too much of a different posture than we were last night. We're not here to take over the investigation yet. We're not here to declare that this is a terrorist event, as has been speculated in the news media. And I also can't confirm or deny a lot of the theories and speculation that is in the print. We continue to build the team. We're bringing in more experts. We're conducting what I would now term a massive, typical investigation here. I think we have multiple theories up on the board. We're running all these theories out. We're not going to get discouraged on any particular theory because something takes it down a peg. We're going to continue to look at all these things. That's the right thing to do. We're going to look at it as fast as we can look at it. We're going to bring those theories to the forefront that seem to have the most credibility. We're going to operate this the way we operate any major investigation.
Is this not a criminal investigation at this point?
It certainly is. We're looking at this as a criminal investigation. That's correct.
So in fact, sir, you have taken over from the NTSB?
No, we have not. No. And I'm not going to dicker with you on the semantics of that, but we have not. No.
All the theories that you're looking at, is one beginning to emerge as most prominent to you?
No. Not one in particular. We're running all the theories, most of which you could guess what they are. We're running all those theories. We're not ready to focus on any one yet.
Have you eliminated any? Have you eliminated any that have already been published?
No, I haven't eliminated anything. Well, we're going to look for residue. We're going to look for certain streaking patterns. We're going to look for the way the metal is shaped or fragmented, if it is. We don't know that. We're going to look at all those things.
Have you gotten any physical evidence yet that there is a terrorist attack? Have you gotten any physical hint?
Oh, we have a lot of hints. I mean, the day we started this thing, we had a million hints.
Physical hint?
Nothing that's going to put us over the top to declare this yet.
The most important thing is to get those recorders. That's critical. And then, we don't know what we need at this point, so we'll be interested in control surfaces, we'll be interested in the engines particularly, we'll be interested in cargo holds.
Can you talk about the Navy's role? What is the Navy here in what form?
There are some representatives of the Navy here, there are others that are coming.
The divers are coming from what agencies?
Well, the divers that were out there this morning are from the New York City Harbor Police, I believe it is.
But
City of New York.
Will they be doing the brunt of the diving, or are Navy divers expected?
That remains to be determined, but I think we certainly had the impression, and everybody believes, that those divers that were out there this morning knew very much what they were doing.
Do you have any engines,
competent folks.
The weather is expected to clear up tomorrow, and the search will resume. Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, Olympic security, White House security, real security in a real democracy, and some Friday night politics. Now security at the Olympics, which began today in Atlanta. Charlene Hunter-Gault has that story.
President Clinton arrived this morning to kick off opening Olympic ceremonies. He was greeted by the Speaker of the House and other Georgia politicians, as well as a heavier than usual security detail. Wednesday night's fiery crash off Long Island brought new attention to security in Atlanta. Security for the thousands of athletes and spectators was already tight, and there are indications it will get tighter. The security in Atlanta is said to be the largest for a peacetime event in the United States. The event comes in the wake of bombings in the United States at the World Trade Center in New York in 1993 and in Oklahoma City in 1995. In 1972, 11 Israeli athletes were slain at the Olympics in Munich. Local, state, and federal governments are expected to spend as much as $303 million on Atlanta Olympic security. Some 30,000 police officers, military personnel, agents from the FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and guards from private companies will be on hand. Corporations are also donating machines like this that can read your hand and match it to your ID. The police department has invested in the latest computer surveillance. With thousands of Olympic fans expected to descend upon Atlanta over the next couple of weeks, security at the city's Hartsfield Airport is especially tight. Any suspicious-looking vehicles are being towed. Police officers are out in full force in the terminal, although there is little activity at the TWA desk. Security here is already state-of-the-art, with a sophisticated CTX 5000 explosive scanner. It works like a hospital CAT scanner and was introduced after the loss of Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. Throughout the city, security measures are visible. Officers are out in force around the huge press center, where thousands of journalists will be based. Hundreds of surveillance cameras have been installed to watch over the visitor center, and specially armed military police and SWAT officers surround the Olympic Village, where the 10,000 athletes are living. Bill Rathburn is the security director for the Olympic Committee.
We're investing heavily in electronic security, in perimeter fencing. The village will be as close to absolute security as we can possibly make it. It'll be helpful, friendly, professional security, not oppressive security.
With tonight's opening ceremony, both visitors and athletes are likely to experience lengthy delays as the security tightens.
Now to the #1 security concern back here in Washington, protecting the White House. Kwame Holman reports.
Pennsylvania Avenue sweeps majestically away from Congress's home in the Capitol, past some of Washington's finest buildings, to the president's front door, the White House at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Inaugural parades with their chief executives have traveled this route so many times, it's been called the Avenue of Presidents. We shall overcome. It also is known as America's Main Street because Americans have gathered here to protest wars, march against abortion, and in support of civil rights. And over the years, up to 26,000 vehicles a day streamed along the 2-block stretch of the avenue in front of the White House. At the center of a bustling city, it was a major east-west thoroughfare. Eugene Watson has driven a taxi in Washington for 25 years.
In front of the White House, especially on the weekend during tourist season, is where you pick up a lot of fares at. Even though they don't have a cab stand there, but you can always get a fare in front of the White House. There's always business there.
But all that changed just over a year ago, in the wake of the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City in April 1995. The section of Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House was closed to vehicles. Assistant Treasury Secretary for Enforcement James Johnson is responsible for White House security and says the decision to close Pennsylvania Avenue was made by the president himself after an exhaustive security review, a review that was underway before the Oklahoma City bombing.
But the Oklahoma City blast simply confirmed what we already knew, is that a car bomb, a large car bomb placed in a busy public area could have devastating and wide-reaching impact. And there is probably no busier, no more public area than the area in and around the White House.
Is the White House and the president, are they now safe from an Oklahoma City-style attack?
Yes, they are.
As a result of closing the avenue?
Yes, they are.
Federal officials will not discuss specific security threats, but say there's ample evidence that the White House might be a target. They point to two recent incidents, the bombing of a U.S. Air Force barracks in Saudi Arabia and the arrest of 12 militia members in Arizona for possession of illegal arms and bomb-making material. Secretary Johnson uses transcripts from the recent World Trade Center bombing trial to make his point.
Sheikh Omar Rahman and 9 of his followers were convicted in New York for plotting a terrorist campaign against New York. The Sheikh exhorted his followers to target prominent national monuments, to target the places where the United States leaders reside. And that's this White House. That is where the nation could be most vulnerable to a large-scale car bomb attack.
There would be no restrictions to any kind of activity that people wanted to have happen. You know, right now...
After the closure, the National Park Service drew up a plan to beautify the area in front of the White House. The $40 million design includes a pedestrian mall with new fountains, broader sidewalks, and a curved, narrow roadway for the inaugural parade. But Senator Rod Grams, Republican of Minnesota, says closing the avenue was an overreaction and it should be reopened.
I think this was used, Oklahoma City was used as an excuse, a knee-jerk reaction. And when people come here and see that their White House is now somehow fortified between ugly concrete barriers and manned with armed guards and vehicles and dogs and patrols, this isn't what we should be reflecting to the rest of the world.
Washington Mayor Marion Barry went to Capitol Hill to tell Congress his financially troubled city has been dealt another blow by the sudden closure of the avenue.
When businesses lose income in that immediate area, the district loses tax income. The Pennsylvania Avenue area is an important business area, a very important business district. And the closing of Pennsylvania Avenue is an obstacle to transforming the district in terms of trying to keep businesses in our city.
And though he's no expert, cab driver Watson believes closing Pennsylvania Avenue does not provide greater security for the president.
People are walking through there now. You know, the cars weren't doing anything. Seemed like to me there was more protection when they had the street open.
The avenue is closed. Neil Livingston is a counterterrorism expert. He has worked on security issues for corporate executives and is the author of several books on terrorism.
You know, when you had traffic out here on Pennsylvania Avenue, it formed a natural barrier to fence jumpers and so on. They'd have to dodge the traffic in order to get over the fence.
Livingston says the closing of Pennsylvania Avenue also will not prevent incidents like the pilot who crashed his small plane into the south lawn of the White House in September of 1994. Or gunman Francisco Duran, who just 6 weeks later fired 27 rounds from an AK-47 at the White House before being subdued by passing tourists.
You see the guard shack right here, this is where most of the security presence is. They're inside. They're very insulated from what's going on out here. And in the case of Mr. Duran, there was no one along here at all. And so as a consequence, it took 2 tourists that had to jump him and pull him to the ground as he was reloading his weapon. I think we need more security around the White House, and we should open up the avenue again.
We do have more uniformed officers, and we are concerned with something more than a lone gunman. The most devastating attack would be the attack of a car bomb, and leaving the avenue open would not prevent such an attack.
Congress first must approve any spending for the Park Service plan, and some members are fighting to block it. Senator Grams is author of a non-binding resolution calling for immediate reopening of the avenue.
I think we get enough parks in Washington, D.C. We don't have to put another one out in front of the White House.
Predictably, Johnson and Grams also disagree on whether blocking off the avenue creates greater access for the more than 1 million people who come to see the White House each year.
There are children that walk across the avenue and still visit the White House. There are all sorts of people that can walk through and around the avenue, and tourism and visitation to the White House remains the same. So the People's House is still the People's House.
Closing Pennsylvania Avenue has cut off all access for those tour buses. People who come to Washington can stop, but a big thing for them is to be able to drive by the White House and at least wave and see where their president lives. So no, this hasn't created more access for the American public.
Visitors to the White House also seem to be split on the issue.
It's kind of a hazard to walk across the street if there's a bunch of traffic on there.
I can understand people wanting better car access, you know, if that makes a big traffic jam by closing it off, by rerouting it.
Right. Well,
it'd definitely be nicer for tourists to be here.
They've been able to protect the president with or without this being blocked or not, so I feel like it's unnecessary. However, I do enjoy having this part of the road for rollerblading, but I think it would be more convenient for me to be able to drive on this.
Senator Grams works at the Capitol, a building ringed by its own security. Police check all vehicles entering the grounds, and visitors to the building must go through metal detectors and security searches. And like Pennsylvania Avenue, several streets around the Senate office building where Grams works are closed to traffic.
So we don't practice what we've been preaching. So no, we're going to be looking at these other areas and trying to get greater accessibility around the buildings, the Senate office buildings, etc., because we don't think that closing these streets represents the democracy that we're so proud of.
But security officials say they consider the closing of Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House to be essentially permanent, and the only person with the authority to reopen it is the president himself.
Now a discussion of how secure it is possible to be in an open democracy. Elizabeth Farnsworth is in charge.
How much security is enough and how much is too much when balanced against individual liberties and personal enjoyment. We hear four views. Wellington Webb is the mayor of Denver and chairman of a committee that coordinates anti-terrorism policy for the Conference of Mayors. Melanie Lomax was on the Olympic Security Commission in charge of airport security during the 1984 Games in Los Angeles. She is now a civil rights attorney. Larry Johnson was Deputy Director for Counterterrorism at the State Department from 1989 to 1993. He's now a private security consultant. John Strauchs was formerly with the CIA. He now designs security systems for the federal government and for private companies as a consultant. Thank you all for being with us. Mayor Webb, you're dealing with a major security situation right now because of the trial of the alleged Oklahoma City bombers. How have you reconciled, how have you put together the need for security with your citizens' other interests?
Well, obviously it's a balancing act that you have to go through. One is we have to maintain protection for our existing citizens, but at the same time we have to provide extra security working with U.S. Marshal's Office, FBI, Justice, and others in terms of providing security around the courthouse, providing support for the marshals and the businesses downtown. But I also believe that we're going through a different era within America. I think Americans understand they're much more vulnerable than they have been in the past, whether it's the Trade Center bombing that took place or the bombing that took place in Oklahoma City or here in Denver. About 10 years ago, we had an assassination of a radio talk show host by right-wing extremist groups. I think people are more cautious. People are also understanding that whether the issue is foreign or domestic, that we have to take certain precautions to protect the democracy in which we live. And it costs money, and it also causes changing some lifestyle habits.
You heard the kind of debate that goes on about what's happened outside the State House. Surely you've had that kind of debate in Denver. Are people upset with some of the security measures, though, even understanding the necessity for them?
Well, some of them obviously wish things did not have to be like they are in terms of making changes. But the other thing is that we do live in a democracy. We live in the strongest country in the world. And to have an assassination of world leaders and prominent dignitaries that administer this country certainly doesn't say a lot for our ability to be the strongest country in the world. We've had to deal with that issue in the past. So I think that the American people, although understanding that they have to have some changes and would prefer not to, that common sense normally prevails in terms of saying it's better to be safe and little discomfort rather than have some people dead with no changes in behavior.
Melanie Lomax, the mayor, referred to things that have changed and some of the reasons for the changes, the perception of our vulnerability. As the person in charge of airport security for the Olympics in 1984, do you think the challenge was quite different in '84 than for the people in charge of security in Atlanta this year?
Well, first of all, you've given me a promotion which I don't think I quite deserve. I was not the head of security during the Olympics. I was on the Airport and Police Commission and worked on security issues for the Olympics.
Okay, good. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I meant to say head of airport security. Was I wrong about that too?
No, as a commissioner, you're
okay.
head of, you work on security.
Okay.
What I was going to say is I think that the mayor is very sensible in his explanation. I don't think that security in America means that that you're relinquishing your First Amendment or constitutional rights. I mean, there is a certain amount of liberty to be had, as we all understand, with security precautions being taken for the public good. I don't get my sense of freedom in America as an American through whether or not I have to go through Israeli-type precautions in the airport. Since for a year and a half now here in Los Angeles in the Unabomber threat, there has been what they call a Stage 3 alert, which is the next to last on a scale of most severe. You're required to show your identification both upon boarding and at the outside the airport. You're required to go through more vigorous checks than ever before. And I think that that is all service to the common good. We live in this world. We've seen violent after violent incident that doesn't make any sense, that's for some idle political thought. And I don't think that the people in this country are willing to, to continue to have unbridled freedom with a loss of security.
Do you think the situation has changed a lot? Or is it just a perception of change? I mean the threat from terrorism.
I think the perception has changed more than the actual threat. If you go back when Melanie was dealing with the issue in 1984, you had a higher number of international and domestic terrorist attacks at that time than you do now. At the same time, the number of states that were sponsoring terrorism in 1984-85, 7. Right now, even though there are 6 countries still on the list, there are only 2 that are really aggressively involved with that. Domestically, we've not yet seen the rising up of an organized, coordinated group that's going out and attacking government infrastructure. I view the attack in Oklahoma City as an aberrance. It was not part of an organized group that said, look, we're going to attack the United States government, we're not going to stop. That incident happened last April. Fortunately, we've not had a reoccurrence. So I am concerned that
even with the World Trade Towers and with Oklahoma City, you think it's a perception of threat more than a reality?
Yeah, there's a threat out there, but I think we run the risk of exaggerating it, and in exaggerating it, as happened during World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor, an overreaction, and in the result of that, citizens of the United States lost their freedoms, particularly the Japanese Americans. So I think we need to have an eye-open, realistic approach, but we don't need to be emotional about it.
What do you think about that, Mr. Strauchs?
Well, on that same issue, if I could take that same kind of thought from a different perspective, and I think it's very important to keep in mind that whatever security measures we decide to implement as a society, we're not preventing this terrorist incident from occurring. We're simply preventing it from occurring to us. We're going to make it happen to somebody else.
What do you mean?
It's easy to have the notion that by doing all these things that we are preventing a terrorist act. All we're going to do is prevent a terrorist act, possibly, at one specific location. That's the location being protected.
You're saying if somebody's really determined, they're going to hit somebody.
Right, and so in a cynical way, the idea is to make it to happen to somebody else.
Well, I disagree with that for this reason. We saw clearly that when you started going after states that were involved with sponsoring terrorism, the groups that were carrying those acts out, their capability was reduced. And it's not only that they shifted their... We saw clearly that...
Right, and so in a cynical way, the idea is to make it to happen to somebody else.
Well, I disagree with that for this reason. We saw clearly that when you started going after states that were involved with sponsoring terrorism, the groups that were carrying those acts out, their capability was reduced. And it's not only that they shifted their operations elsewhere, they stopped their operations. You can cut into that. At the same time, I think it's a little illusory to offer the goal of complete security, that you're going to be able to protect everyone from everything. We still continue to live in a dangerous world. I personally believe the greatest safeguard we have in the United States is having a democratic system that works. Because if people feel that they can participate in the government, they're not going to seek these, if you will, illegal methods for attacking the government. So I think protecting democracy and civil rights must be preeminent.
Mr. Strauchs, where do you come fit in and weigh in on the question of whether or not it's a perceived threat more than a real threat, that it's worse, that's perceived more than it is real?
Well, I basically agree that the levels of threat probably haven't changed dramatically, but they have changed a little bit.
In what sense?
Well, generally speaking, when any movement is on the brink of extinction because it's no longer popular or they're not successful, there's a certain period of desperation, and during that period of desperation, terrorist acts are more likely to occur. That seems to have happened around the world. For example, it's very possible that the establishment of, or possible establishment of a Palestinian state may very well exasperate that particular threat, because those people that are against that idea and are very anti-Israeli, they're desperate. And if they want world attention, certainly terrorist acts is one important way of getting it for them.
Yes, Mayor.
Let me make a suggestion that I think I have a slightly different point of view. I think sometimes we get caught up in these intellectual debates. I think that if you ask people that are walking down any street, do they think that America or they as American citizens are more vulnerable today than we were 20 years ago? They're not going to give you a list of countries that are on a State Department list that are friend or foe. What they're going to tell you is that for a federal building to be bombed in the heartland of America in Oklahoma makes them feel more vulnerable. They're going to say for people that went to work in the trade towers in New York City and for a bombing to take place there, that they feel more vulnerable. I think that Americans, by and large, we're not exaggerating it at all. What we're saying is that in many cases, because the world is different today than it was before, that we are more vulnerable. And I think that for us not to suggest that the people that died in New York or Oklahoma doesn't make some people feel more vulnerable compared to the 1940s or World War I is quite different than what I hear from average Joe citizen.
And Mayor, go ahead, Ms. Lomax.
Yes, I was just going to add to the mayor's comments that I don't think that anyone, if you use the same Joe on the street, and you asked him whether or not he thought he was sacrificing fundamental principles of democracy in America because of the new real threats in the world, and the the clear appearance here that America is no longer exempt from the sort of mass violence and political violence that other countries have experienced in years. For many years. You ask them, do you think that you're sacrificing your rights if some additional measured increased security is taken, for example, at the airport? And would you be willing to, for example, go through a lengthier examination of your luggage as you board a plane? I think you're going to get 9 or 8 people out of 10 saying, absolutely, it's not a question of freedom on that basis, and I much rather do what is ever necessary to lend itself to a more secure situation with the clear understanding that you can't eliminate the dangers in the world.
Let's look at that. Let's look at the future for a minute. Do you think we will see more security, people having to wait longer at airports, all luggage checked, more like Israel, for example? Do you think we have that in the future? Let's use airports first as an example.
Well, I think we do need to have some fundamental changes in our airport security. Right now we have a patchwork quilt system. We have one system in place for international travel, one system in place domestically. Domestically, it's much more vulnerable because the same kinds of security measures aren't in place. At the same time, we don't have technology to reliably detect explosives. That needs to come online to offer some advantage. So from the airport standpoint, it needs to move in that direction, and I believe the federal government needs to take stronger leadership in that role.
And do you think, how about other public buildings? Do you think we will see more security in other kinds of public buildings?
Oh, I think in the next decade it's going to be a chilling change in many respects in terms of what we're used to. You can be able to tell your grandchildren what it used to be like to go to downtown Manhattan. I think you're going to have a very difficult time parking in any federal building, for example. I think that's going to be closed. I think curb lanes around many streets, if not the entire street, are going to be closed. I think we're going to build buildings entirely differently. Oklahoma City taught us that you need to build a building that doesn't entirely collapse when one column goes out. Security inside the building is certainly not going to change, but you're going to see a lot more, and it's probably unavoidable. I mean, it's regrettable, but probably unavoidable.
Mayor Webb, we just have a few seconds left, but are you in the commission of the Conference of Mayors? Is this the kind of thing you're hearing?
Well, obviously people are concerned, and I think that there will be more emphasis on security, but I think at the same time is that I think we also have to be realistic about saying that we want to do what is necessary to provide as much protection without giving up a lot of the everyday liberties that we've come to enjoy, but the world we live in today is quite different than the world that we were born into.
Well, thank you all very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.